In this series, we will speak with scientists from the Dangoor Center for Personalized Medicine to gain an up-close understanding of what happens in their research laboratories, which developments coming out of their laboratories are expected to reach the market, and how medicine will look in the coming years. This time, we're hosting Professor Eitan Okun. Professor Okun is from the Dangoor Center, the Minna and Everett Goodman Faculty of Life Sciences, and the Gonda Multidisciplinary Brain Research Center. In his lab, Professor Okun studies Alzheimer's disease and the immune system during the aging process, with a focus on neurodegenerative diseases. He completed all 3 of his degrees at Bar-Ilan University, and after earning a bachelor's degree in biology, he pursued his master's and doctoral degrees in immunology. Between 2007 and 2001, he conducted a postdoctoral fellowship in neuroimmunology at the National Institutes of Health in Baltimore, Maryland. Welcome. Thank you for joining us, Professor Okun.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
So your lab focuses on one of the biggest crises affecting the world's population today, Alzheimer's disease and neurodegenerative diseases. Can you give us a little bit of the data around what's happening with Alzheimer's or any other sort of neurodegenerative diseases and why it's so critical that you continue with this research?
So lifespan increases in the developed world, and in parallel we know that as soon as we reach the age of 60, every 5 years the number of people with dementia doubles itself, such that we get to the age of 85 with 30% of the population demented.
Wow.
Now, add another 5 years, okay, to that lifespan, and then the population of demented individuals reaches 60%, which is becoming a very significant number. Now, the majority of those demented individuals will suffer from Alzheimer's disease-related dementia. So, but it's important to understand that Alzheimer's is not a single disease. It's a syndrome that has many different causes, but they all culminate into forgetfulness, inability to know where we are at in the environment, and it's a progressive disease.
So there are multiple forms of dementia in addition to Alzheimer's?
Correct. There are vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementia, Parkinson's disease, and more. And we should also understand that in many of the cases, it's a mixed dementia. For example, an individual will exhibit Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
When you say exhibit, is it that if I saw this person, there are different behaviors they're exhibiting, or are you talking about looking at the brain, and then through brain imaging, you can see there are different neurodegenerative processes that are taking place in the brain?
It's an excellent question in the respect that the common person that goes to the physician and he asks, "Doctor, what does my mother or what does my father has?" The physician, in most cases, determines what the person has based on questionnaires, based on assessment of the individual, which is not a molecular assessment. It's not based on biomarkers, which are physiological indicators to the specific disease that the person has. You mentioned imaging. It is possible nowadays to image the brain and to be able to tell whether there is an accumulation of a specific protein that is harmful on one hand, but it is also characteristic of a specific disease. For example, in Alzheimer's disease, it is possible to conduct a brain imaging that will tell you whether a protein called amyloid beta or tau accumulate in the brain of the patient. However, this is not the common practice. So the vast majority of people nowadays, at least, that are diagnosed based on their behavior.
But how can you treat it? Is the treatment the same no matter what's going on in the brain? Or is there no treatment, really?
So once an individual is diagnosed with, say, Alzheimer's disease, then there is, depending on where the person is diagnosed at, what country, which region, they can be sent to an imaging to determine whether they really are amyloid positive, as they say. And then the person can get a prescription for one of two therapies that were approved by the FDA for treating Alzheimer's disease patients. Nowadays, there is a process in which blood tests are starting to become more prevalent for pathologies such as Alzheimer's disease. And they can predict in accuracy of 90%.
Wow.
Yes. And this will most likely be the future of treating Alzheimer's disease. So our aim as researchers is to enable an earlier diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, say 10 years before symptoms appear. We need to understand the importance because during those 10 years, even more than that, the disease already, is active in the brain.
Even before people start exhibiting the forgetfulness or the...
We have no idea. I mean...
So anybody could be walking around with their brain already developing these amyloid
plaques,
beta plaques, or the tau, you said?
Tau tangles.
Tau tangles, and they wouldn't know, but if you were able to test for it, you would see what was going on in the brain even before they showed those symptoms.
Yes, but it is not common practice still, those blood tests, and but I'm pretty sure that in the coming years it will be more common practice.
So if you get in earlier though, let's say you were able to diagnose someone 10 years before they exhibited behaviors, the goal is that there would be some sort of treatment earlier on. Like I assume, like most medical treatments, the earlier you start to deal with the problematic elements in the body, the better the prognosis.
Exactly. This is not the case yet for Alzheimer's. The definition by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, the American Food and Drug Administration, is that you need to have some symptoms. Actually, it's a debate in the scientific and medical communities whether you should screen for Alzheimer's disease and say, well, your risk for developing Alzheimer's disease is pretty high, and then you will be stressed and think, oh, what should I do? Or whether you should only inform people or diagnose people once symptoms appear. The stress factor is somewhat relevant because at a time such as our times when Alzheimer's therapies are not amazing, people might say, well, why should I know if I'm sick or not? There is no effective treatment.
Well, so that's what I was going to ask you, is I know that a lot of labs, there are a number of places that are working on vaccines, trying to knock down the proteins, but I know that in your lab you're also looking at some lifestyle things, right? Exercise, stress, sleep. Have you found any positive results when people change their lifestyle habits? Does it slow the progression of the disease or deter it or anything positive from those things?
Okay, so to answer that, I need to explain what factors affect our predisposition to a disease such as Alzheimer's.
Please.
Which is an age-related disease. So things that accumulate for us in our health throughout our lifespan affect the risk for this disease. So genetics, of course, is important. Okay. The vast minority of the cases of Alzheimer's have a clear genetic cause, which we can tell this mutation in your genome will cause Alzheimer's for sure.
The vast minority.
Minority, yeah.
I want to emphasize that because people think vast majority, but you're saying minority. It's not, mostly it's not a genetic thing.
It's not a clear genetic thing.
Okay.
It's not what we call the monogenic disease. So very few cases are such monogenic. The majority of cases is people that may have a genetic risk factor. The most known one is called ApoE4. And this could elevate the risk by 40%, for example. But here we're talking about percentage, risk. And when we talk about risk, we talk about accumulation of causes that can contribute to this risk. So far we mentioned genetics. Okay? So you could have a genetic risk of up to 40%, but what about the rest of the percentage? So to that we call environmental factors. I'm not talking about the weather, but I'm talking about things that are not genetic.
Outside the body.
Well, they can be in the body, but that external factors affect them. For example, sleep.
Okay.
If you don't sleep well throughout your life, your adult life, then this is a strong contributing factor for brain diseases. Why is that? Because during our sleep, the brain gets toxins out of the brain to the blood, and then the body gets rid of them. Also, DNA is being repaired in our brain during sleep. Also, memory are consolidated from short-term to long-term. All of that happens during sleep. Now, when your sleep is fragmented or too short, you can't perform all these activities. And when you consider the lifelong accumulation of these effects, it adds up. Exercise is another thing. We tend to say, well, yeah, exercise is, of course, we know it's good, it's beneficial, of course.
For everything. It helps your heart, it helps your this, it should help your brain also.
Of course, exercise is important.
It's good.
But maybe if we adhere to it, it would actually have an impact. So what is the most important physiological effect of exercise? Why do we hail it so much as an important thing? It does several things. One, it promotes the formation of blood vessels in our brain. You should know that the deterioration of blood vessels in our brain is a contributing factor for stroke, for example, brain stroke. Vascular dementia. So the continuous supply of nutrients and oxygen to our neurons in the brain is critical. And if we don't maintain our blood vessels in the brain, we are dimming our neurons to premature death. Okay, so exercise is known to promote. It's a process called angiogenesis, the formation of new blood vessels. Okay? Another thing that exercise does is promote or increase our ability to form connections between our neurons in the brain. The more connections you have between your neurons in the brain, the slower the decline, the cognitive decline that you will experience as you age.
And that has nothing to do with the buildup of protein. That's just another relevant factor when you say the connections here.
So the connections, let's explain it this way. The more connections you have between neurons, the stronger your memories are, and the less prone the connections themselves to be degraded.
Okay, understood.
Okay, because they become more permanent, more solid, more stable. So these two processes are promoted by exercise.
Particular kind of exercise? I remember you had a treadmill in your lab at some point, didn't you? You were testing people with exercise.
We gave them protocols for exercise, but they did it themselves.
Okay.
And we tested their cognition. Actually, for children, we found out that high-intensity functional training improves cognitive abilities in kids.
Interesting.
Yes.
So it's good for your brain at every age.
At every age.
And high intensity. So it's not enough to just go for a walk.
That particular one was high intensity, but actually there was just a study that was recently published that showed that people that commute to work by bicycle have a reduction of 47% in the risk for death from different causes compared to people that commute to work by car.
Do you think that's all the exercise piece, or do you think it's, you know, not being under the stress of traffic and other kinds of things?
I believe it's a combination of reduced stress.
Being in fresh air.
Well, the air is not always fresh in the city,
true.
right?
That's true, but just getting, I don't know, I'm a big outdoors person, so I know you are also.
Everybody breathes the same air, even if you're in a bus or in a car. I mean, you breathe air.
I'm
right?
talking to a scientist. Yes, you are correct. I have to be very careful with what variables I'm throwing out there.
It's
very
all
specific.
In the details,
that's
yes.
right. That's right.
But another finding from that study was that if you commuted to work by foot, by walking, it was much less efficient than cycling, yes.
Do you think that's the high intensity?
I think it's the component of aerobic activity that contributes to it. So this actually provides a very strong incentive to improve the infrastructure for bicycle in the cities.
Yeah, bike paths and things that are less dangerous, because otherwise you'll elevate your mortality rate. If you ride a bicycle, you have a more likely chance of being hit by a car.
Absolutely, and this was the third finding from that study, that indeed these individuals reduced their all-cause mortality risk, but it doubled their risk for traffic injuries.
Right, makes sense.
Yes, so you have to be careful.
Right, so sleep, exercise, you already sort of hinted at stress being relevant in terms of impact on the brain.
Exactly. Chronic stress is known to impair the ability to generate connections between our neurons. Also, lack of sleep impairs the ability to form connections. You cannot memorize anything if you lose sleep.
Right, we can see that you just see that in everyday life when people are not well rested.
I hope you don't see that on everyday life.
Well, I don't want to talk about my sleep. It stresses me. So then I can compound the problem of my lack of sleep by stressing over it. So at least I exercise. What about foods? Are there specific foods? Because I listen to podcasts sometimes and they talk about superfoods for your brain. Is that real?
No.
So I can't just eat blueberries and then I'm going to live forever and have a perfect brain, no?
No.
I'm disappointed.
Superfoods are good for those that make them.
I understand.
With respect to food, what's important is that from whatever we know, from all we know from research, is that the less you eat, the better your cognition is. If you extend the periods of time in which you do not eat, in other words, you fast in them, it helps promote processes within your cells, in your body, that deal with recycling of toxic waste and abnormal proteins and organelles within the cells, that otherwise this process cannot happen. For example, if you continuously eat all day long, it does not allow for this recycling process.
Your body's busy breaking down the food, right?
It's busy breaking down the food, yes, but to what end? To the end of generating nutrients to build more cells, to build tissues, etc. So you can look at it in this way. Your cells cannot do the two processes at the same time. Build themselves and at the same time recycle proteins, okay? So you need to allow for a significant separation in time between the building process and the recycling process. To those that care about this process, it's called autophagy.
Right.
So we want to promote anything that promotes autophagy. Exercise is another intervention that elevates autophagy. So you don't have to fast in order to promote autophagy. You can also exercise. But also don't exaggerate in exercise, because studies show that those that exaggerate in exercise have a higher risk for death.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you got to find the perfect balance
Yes.
here, right? So intermittent fasting, low stress, lots of sleep, and exercise would be your prescription for the healthiest brain.
Yes. Now, there are a lot of notes that we have to remember when we deal with that. First of all, the elderly population. One of the major risk factors for death, let's call it, in the third age, in people in the third age, is the risk of falling. They fall, they break a hip or a hand or an arm, and a year, two following that, they start to lose their cognitive abilities.
What's the connection?
We don't know that for sure. It could be due to immune activation and inflammation that they succumb to, and it hits their brain. The way to avoid it in the elderly population is to have a better balance.
Right.
Okay. How do you improve your balance? You improve it A, by exercise, and B, by increasing your mass, muscle mass.
So a certain kind of exercise to build muscle is important.
Exactly, but it has to be accompanied by a sufficient intake of proteins in the diet.
Which is a problem for the elderly. I remember reading that they often don't eat enough and don't eat enough protein in particular.
So to circumvent this risk for falling, you need to engage in high-intensity functional trainings and a lot of protein supplementation.
Interesting.
So if you're an elderly individual and you consider fasting, you need to calibrate it well with the timing of your physical activity. Okay?
Got it. So does your lab look specifically at Alzheimer's or at all of the different potential dementia?
We look at Alzheimer's related dementias, which means Alzheimer's disease, but also Down syndrome.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about that. I was reading some of the research that you do, which is just fascinating. That has to do with pregnant women carrying fetuses that are Down syndrome, and the impact of that, or I don't know if it's the impact, the correlation between that and their likelihood of developing dementia later on.
Yes, I will explain.
Yes, because it seems like two completely and utterly separate things, and I'd love to understand it.
I'll try to do my best.
I have faith.
So earlier, I mentioned that there are very few cases in which there is a clear genetic cause for Alzheimer's disease. In those clear cases, one of them is when a gene called amyloid precursor protein is mutated. Okay. Individuals with Down syndrome have 3 chromosomes 21. That's why it's called the trisomy for chromosome 21. Now, all other individuals, or most other individuals, have 2 chromosomes of each kind. They have a third one. And it happens to be that on that third copy of chromosome 21 lies the amyloid precursor protein gene. Therefore, these individuals with Down syndrome, they have lifelong overexpression of amyloid precursor protein, which leads to amyloid accumulation in their brains and therefore to cognitive decline. Okay, so the majority of individuals with Down syndrome will have Alzheimer's disease.
If they live to a certain age?
And they do live to a certain age nowadays. In the past, up until the 1970s, they used to live up to 10 years of age.
Wow.
Yes.
I didn't realize it was that recent.
That's why I'm here.
Okay.
So this was the case because they were regarded to as individuals to which nothing can help. They were kept at mental institutions. The condition was not understood. But with the advent of improved medical practices for them, better treatment, treating their congenital heart defects, etc., nowadays they reach to the age of 60.
That's amazing.
Yes. And as they reach the age of 60, they suffer mostly from Alzheimer's disease. And this is the number one cause of death for these individuals. So this is one side of the story. Individuals with Down syndrome suffer from Alzheimer's disease, and we study this condition. The other side of the story is that it seems that the mothers that carried these fetuses have a higher risk for Alzheimer's disease themselves. So simply by carrying the fetus.
Wow, because of the blood flow through the placenta? Or I'm throwing out terms that I almost had you and then you gave me a look. So explain it, I'll stop guessing.
No, I gave you the look because it was quite accurate.
Ah, okay, good.
That's pretty good.
Well, thank you.
How about doing a PhD in my lab?
I'll come to your lab.
Yeah. So it seems, and that's a mechanism that we study in the lab, that there is a transfer of cells during pregnancy from the fetus and the placenta to the mother. Okay, and these cells circulate in the maternal blood, as we call it, and then they kind of make their final rest, let's call it, in the maternal tissues.
And this is where that extra chromosome, or that you were saying, has the amyloids in it, so that also transfers to the mother. So now she has these cells with the extra amyloid that Down syndrome children have?
Exactly. This is part of the mechanism. We call it microchimerism.
Okay.
Reason being that the mother not only has her own cells, but also cells from her fetus. Mind you, this is the case in every pregnancy.
Yes. I remember hearing that once you have a baby with someone, you actually have the father's cells inside of you also.
Well, let's call it fetal cells.
Okay, but they get some of their DNA from their father, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So the fetal cell is, let's call it a combination of the genes from you and from your partner. And therefore, the fetus will have its own genetic signature, which is a mix between you two. And some of these cells will be in your body, which means that you're a chimeric organism at that point.
Women are fascinating.
They are.
Add that to the list.
They are with pregnancy, without pregnancy, they're fascinating.
That's true. But I remember reading also, I was surprised by this, that women have a much higher rate of Alzheimer's than men. And I'm sure it's not just because of Down syndrome children. Do you have any idea why?
I do have some ideas.
Okay, can you share them with us? You say that and then you stop. So now I'm going to pull it out of you, Eitan. Why? Share with us.
Okay, so let's look at the numbers. Women have almost a doubled risk for Alzheimer's disease compared to men at all ages, 60s, 70s, 80s, so on. And there are several causes for that. One of them is hormonal. At menopause, the levels of hormones change in the maternal body, in the female body, I should say. For example, follicular stimulating hormone increases. It's not estrogen. It's a different hormone. FSH called.
Okay.
It rises sharply as opposed to men at that same age, in which it doesn't rise sharply. And this hormone was shown to promote Alzheimer-related pathology in the brain.
Interesting.
That's one thing. Second thing, in women, it is sufficient to have one copy of a genetic risk factor called ApoE4 to promote a severe Alzheimer's-related pathology compared to men, in which you need 2 copies of that. So that increases the risk. And therefore, our contribution to this field is that also pregnancies with Down syndrome fetus promotes this effect. So when you combine all these different causes, you get to an almost doubled risk in women.
In women, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So this is what you're working on is what exactly? At what stage in the development of Alzheimer's is your research focused? Is it, early on? Is it once it's diagnosed? where are you aiming?
Okay, so in my lab we have two specific themes that we pursue. One is just the one we described now, how pregnancy with a Down syndrome fetus affects maternal health, and in this respect you can look at it as an attempt to prevent Alzheimer's disease very, very early on. For example, because we try to prevent the transfer of cells from the fetus to the mother.
Can you do that?
You can try.
Okay.
In mice you can do it.
Okay.
For example, you can vaccinate factors that transfer from the fetus to the mother.
Interesting. Okay.
Right. A second theme in my lab is we try to understand what is the contribution of our immune system to Alzheimer's disease. So, in a normal brain, there is no infiltration of immune cells to the brain. Okay. The brain has its own resident immune cells called microglial cells, and they're responsible for dealing with the brain. It seems that in Alzheimer's disease, there is a communication between the immune response outside of the brain and the brain tissue. And at some point, some of these immune cells infiltrate into the brain. So we try to understand what causes this infiltration, what will happen if we prevent this infiltration. Will it affect the course of the disease? Okay.
So do these immune cells come in once somebody has Alzheimer's, or are they causal, or are they actually the Alzheimer's creates an ability for them to infiltrate the brain?
We don't know, but when you arrive to the lab to do your PhD, you can
I'll
work on this
focus on
question.
that.
Yeah.
Okay. And then obviously if it feels like there's some causality or a progression of the disease, you'll try to figure out some way to block them from infiltrating.
And it's very appealing because it's quite easy to intervene in our immune system. You can inject antibodies to the body, to the blood, that target specific cell populations, and they will be ablated. You can deplete them.
So that won't be an issue.
Yes.
How much of this is generalizable, and how much of this is every single person needs a different kind of, or potentially will need a different kind of treatment? How much of this is personalized, we would say, since you're associated with the Dangoor Center for Personalized Medicine?
For a good reason, I should say, because it seems that Alzheimer's disease, I think I said that earlier, it's not one disease, it's a collection of conditions or causes that culminate in a specific phenotype. And the reasons could be, in one person, a bacteria that is present in the mouth cavity. For example, there is a bacteria called Porphyromonas gingivalis, okay, that was shown in research, both in animals and humans, that it can travel within neurons that innervate our mouth cavity all the way to the brain stem, and from there to spread to the brain, causing Alzheimer's disease.
Who knew?
So for some person it will be this bacteria, for a second person it will be a clear genetic factor, for a third person it could be a mutation in a gene that affects those microglial cells in the brain.
Or a fetus, Down syndrome.
Or the fetus. So there are many reasons. We will always have to understand exactly what is the cause for the disease. It's not a disease that we can treat as one drug, one disease.
Makes sense. I'm going to ask you something, and hopefully it's not too personal, but I know you, Eitan, and we're talking about all your research, and it's amazing to see you, and it's amazing to see you in this wonderful place. And I know that...
Thank you.
Well...
I'm not sure I deserve that.
Well, you do. And what I'd like to ask you to speak about, if you're comfortable, is how you came back fully engaged in research after your experience on October 7th. Because you had a very... You're going to tell me it's not unique, and I'm going to say it is, but you were part of the fast responders team at your kibbutz, Alumim. And you were involved in fighting against terrorist infiltration, very different kind of infiltration, while your family was sheltering. And it hasn't been that long. I mean, it's been long, but it hasn't been that long. And you're back, you're doing your research. how did you move past that? How did you kind of continue with your life after that kind of traumatic experience?
That's a good question. Indeed, the events only happened a year and 3 months ago.
Blessed.
It was. It's a process. It's an ongoing process that I've underwent. Initially, I just came to the lab to see what's going on with the students, and to my surprise, they were there doing research, doing experiments, expressing solidarity, as opposed to being at home, not doing anything. So they continued research even during the long months in which I couldn't do it or couldn't help them. But with time, I was able to commit myself more and more to research. With the biggest hurdles for me was the ability to concentrate.
Of course.
In reading papers, writing grant proposals. You know that research in any kind of research, scientific research, requires a lot of money. From scholarships to reagents to holding mice, instrumentation, etc. And to be able to fund all that research, we need to apply for grant applications, for grant funding by applications, submitting applications. And it's a very difficult process.
In good times.
On a normal day.
Right,
yeah.
right.
It's very difficult, it's very complex because everything has to fit. You have to have excellent preliminary data. You have to be focused on the current literature. You have to be focused on writing the proposal. And therefore, it's quite difficult to do when you are not focused, not able to concentrate, because war affects your ability to think, to concentrate in cognitive processes, and this is a struggle that I have been struggling. I've been struggling with this ever since then.
Of course.
But luckily, I have amazing students, and we're getting there. We're getting there.
Good.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to see you and to hear about the research you're doing.
Yes,
and
thank you.
I'm sure being back in the lab itself is actually therapeutic for you, but all the stuff around it is challenging, right?
Yes, we've undergone, so many changes in this time. We used to live in the kibbutz. Now we're at the center of Israel, near the university. I'm riding bicycle.
There you go. You ride your bicycle. Just be
commute.
careful not to get hit, because you have a higher likelihood, I've been told, by someone smart.
Thank you. I am careful in Kiryat Ono, where we're at. There are excellent bike trails on the streets. It's a process to get back back on the feet.
Right, but you are resilient, and you're doing amazing work, and you're going to help millions of people with your work on Alzheimer's. Wow. You give people hope.
Hope so.
Because this is a disease that for so long people just thought was inevitable with old age. We just kind of, all of us went demented at a certain point.
In some respect, it is unavoidable. We age. Nobody is going to live forever. It seems recent research shows that there is a limit to human lifespan. And even if you, let's call it this way. Our aim in research is to delay the onset of these diseases or the symptoms of diseases such as Alzheimer's by 5 to 10 years. I want everybody to reach their maximal lifespan with healthy cognition, with intact cognition. Something else will probably...
Let them die from something else. You'll take care of the brain.
For example, the heart. Heart condition. The largest cause or the most significant cause for mortality is cardiovascular diseases.
Right.
If you look at it percentage-wise, over 60%.
Right. But you're focusing on health span, not just lifespan.
Exactly.
Right?
So as long as the human lifespan allows, I want to make sure that our health span, not health span, but cognitive health span,
yeah,
will be optimal. That's all we have to do. So you don't need to prevent the processes that cause Alzheimer's. They have to do with aging, etc. But just keep our ability to think and memorize for 5 to 10 more years. That's all we need.
Well, I think we're going to need more. I'm hopeful. I'm thinking we're going to need it for a good 20 years. I plan to live past a certain age. But, you know, no, I mean, up to a certain age, but I'd like my brain the whole time. So I'm counting on you to fix it. Okay? Eitan, it's all on you. But really.
No big deal.
No big deal. You're resilient. You can handle it. Thank you for the conversation.
My pleasure.
And for the work you do. It's fascinating and important, and as I started to say, it gives us hope that we can age and age with our mental faculties intact, which is, I can speak for me, there's no point in living longer if I can't continue to think and function and live. You know, just to be a body that's kept alive is not what any of us are aiming for. So you're helping move us in the right direction.
I'll do my best to help you get there.
Thank you, Eitan. Good. I take that both as a professional and a personal promise. So thank you so much for everything.
My pleasure.
Really.
Thank you.
It was wonderful.